Oh, hello. I'm Graham Eugene Thomas, and welcome to my way of thinking.
What? Now that we've discussed political ideology and parties, we're ready to discuss government. How the notion of representing the people is outdated, and most importantly, how the government has mutated over the years to turn the great federation of states united into the nation called the USA. As we all know, the original government was split into three branches. The legislative, consisting of committees and subcommittees, there to create the law and determine how money is to be spent. Split into two chambers, the House of Representatives, elected by the people and representing their interests, and the Senate, appointed by each state legislature, specifically to represent the state's interests. The executive branch, consisting of the President and his cabinet, at the time the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of War, Attorney General, and Postmaster General, there to execute the law, command the military, and to suggest to Congress how money is to be spent. And the judicial branch, consisting of lower district, circuit, and appellate courts, and a Supreme Court, there to interpret and apply the law as well as ensuring equal justice for all under the law, not doing anything preventive or without standing. Before the United States became the United States, each state was a nation, in and of itself. It had its own laws, its own government, and its own money. We all know the Constitution of the United States of America was written with checks and balances to ensure no one branch overpowered the other. But many of us choose to forget it also strived to preserve the sovereignty of each state, ensuring that the new federal government never became more powerful than the state governments. The United States federal and state governments operated within a system of parallel sovereignty, so states were not divisions created from the United States, but rather sovereign nations that, together, comprised the United States.
Secession is akin to treason, and so we'll be trying General Lee for treason.
But the Constitution doesn't make us citizens of the United States. We're still just citizens of the state nations we live in. How can Lee be a traitor if he's not a citizen of the U.S.?
Well, sounds like we need a new amendment.
The legislative branch was originally a House of Representatives and a Senate. The House was comprised of well-meaning, spirited, outspoken, and sometimes very young individuals who became representatives to deal with the popular issues of the day. They were, and still are, elected for a mere 2 years.
People die when they are killed. We need to outlaw guns. Woo!
And the Senate, whose members were appointed by their state legislatures based on the individual's ability to represent that state's interest, thereby protecting the states from federal usurpation of rights and powers.
Although educating its children is a right reserved to the states, the Department of Education must step in. We must create education legislation that taxes the people for federal education benefits. Then, we must force the states to give their children aptitude tests, or else we'll have to withhold federal funding, and their children will suffer if they don't comply. It's win-win-win.
Over my dead body politic.
The liberal progressive movement and the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913 brought about a new order of government. The amendment made it so the interests of the state nations were no longer represented in the U.S. Congress. Instead of being appointed by the state legislators, the amendment made senators elected by the people. At that moment, the federal government of states united became a national government of a single landmass. The one-time great nation-states are now just a footnote in the history of the country's government. The Constitution provides that the number of House representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000 people. Up until 1911, Congress regularly increased the number of the House to account for population growth until it fixed the number of voting House members at 435 in 1911. Since then, as the population grows, each member of society is represented less and less at the federal level. In 1787, there were only 2.5 million people in the United States, represented by 65 representatives, each representing 38,000 people. In 2012, 350 million people are represented by 435 representatives, each accounting for 804,000 people. Senators, who used to be appointed by the states, 26 senators representing 13 states equals 2 senators per state, now are elected. So 350 million people are represented by 100 senators. 3.5 million people per senator. Doesn't that just give you confidence that that letter you wrote to your congressman was actually read, was thought about, and your interests are being represented? Now let's talk about the judicial branch. The judicial branch is responsible for interpreting the meaning of the law, deciding its scope, and declaring who has broken it. The most encompassing power of the judiciary is the power of judicial review, the ability to say something is or isn't constitutional. The United States Constitution does not explicitly establish the power of judicial review. Rather, this power has been inferred from the structure, provision, and history of the Constitution.
So, how did you get the power of judicial review?
Well, the Constitution of the United States of America says that we have the power to interpret the law. And since the Constitution is the law, we get to interpret it as well. And so we've interpreted that we have the power to say what is and what is not constitutional. We've also interpreted that we only have to work 3 days a week, and we make over $200,000 a year. What?
And now we turn to the executive branch. The current executive branch consists of the president and his or her cabinet. The cabinet includes the vice president and the heads of 15 executive departments. The secretaries of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, the Department of the Interior, Labor, State, Transportation, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs, as well as the Attorney General. Literally hundreds of regulatory agencies report to these cabinet secretaries. Compared against the original cabinet, consisting of the Secretary of State, Treasury, and War, the Attorney General, and the Postmaster General, you can see simply by their titles how the 17th Amendment has allowed the federal government to usurp state power. The military, of course, is also part of the executive branch. The Founding Fathers were against a standing army in times of peace, called them dangerous to liberty itself, because they could be used by the government against the people. Only a navy was to be maintained permanently to defend our shores from attack and protect our commercial vessels from pirates. Unfortunately, over the last 200 years, the U.S. has been involved in so many wars, foreign and domestic, it hasn't had a chance to disband the original army created in the Revolutionary War. So what are we to do? Well, today we've grown technologically beyond the need for the House of Representatives to represent us. Congress can and should decide what issues we vote on, and should research and publicly debate them. But the people who are actually concerned with the issues should be the ones who vote. A vote can be placed from a phone, a media player, an ATM, or a gas pump. All Americans could conveniently vote on everything they are concerned with. Putting the House vote directly into the hands of the people and giving the Senate vote back to the states would increase voter awareness, remove lobbyists and special interests from the House because the members could no longer vote, and would eliminate Senate campaign spending, thus removing lobbyists and special interest influence from the Senate. As far as the current judiciary is concerned, I do find the recent health care bill finding by the Supreme Court to be dubious. When the Congress enacted the health care legislation, those members that wrote the bill specifically said that the personal mandate was not a tax, but a penalty. The Supreme Court later found that the personal mandate was indeed a tax because it couldn't possibly be a penalty that affected so many. This flies in the face of the practice of interpretive originalism and stinks of judicial amendment. As far as the executive branch is concerned, I believe that less is more. We need less federal government, fewer federal regulatory agencies, and stronger state governments, with a voice in the federal government. The states must, by convention, repeal the 17th Amendment and take their power back. For me, the saddest part of U.S. history is not any war. In war, soldiers go off, and some of them don't come back. With the passage of the 17th Amendment, soldiers didn't die. The states died. It's truly made the U.S. smaller, weaker, more consolidated than united. Originally created to decrease the amount of state-level corruption in Congress, it has failed miserably by removing the role of the state legislatures from the federal government and increased the involvement of lobbyists and special interests. The original states were nations unto themselves that together formed the United States, retaining their sovereignty. With the 17th Amendment, those state nations no longer exist. Today, in practice, the states are no longer nations. States have become divisions of the United States, more district than nation, unable to secede, defunded if in disagreement with the superior federal government, taxed regardless of disagreement, and the usurpation of rights shall continue until we eventually become the United People of America. Even the Pledge of Allegiance, adopted by Congress in 1942, states that we are one nation and indivisible. Thank you for watching.